Democratic president with a Republican Congress that would prevent any movement on any of these issues?
Well, we have a Democratic president with a Republican Congress at the moment. That's a good question, because it is obviously a lot easier to advance an agenda when you have majorities in Congress. The way we were able to pass some of the most significant legislation and reforms, and that particularly those that got us jump-started out of the Great Recession, was because in the first 2 years of President Obama's term, we had majorities in Congress. That's how the Affordable Care Act passed. It's how we rescued the American automobile industry. It's how we passed the Recovery Act. And the Recovery Act, you can directly look at the graphs and see the reversal in job growth at that point. Previous to that, about a couple months before that, the economy was losing 750,000 jobs a month. The Great Recession was caused by a colossal crash of the banks and policies that let the fox guard the hen house when it came to Wall Street. And we passed Wall Street reform so that we could really start to move things forward. So clearly, we not only need to elect a president, but we need to win majorities back in both the House and the Senate. What we've been doing at the National Party, since the 2014 election, I appointed a Democratic Victory Task Force that was focused on making sure that, of course, our most important priority right in front of us is doing everything we can to elect the Democratic nominee president. But we also are working closely with our state parties to make sure that we can really build and strengthen our state parties, rebuild our bench, make sure that we have an opportunity to focus on the next 3 election cycles leading up to redistricting, so that when we get to 2022, we don't have another situation where we get gerrymandered into oblivion and you have legislators picking their voters instead of the other way around, which Republicans have done. And we've seen the result of what Republican majorities all across this country do in state legislatures. More than 30 states, after being taken over by Republicans, have engaged in horrendous voter suppression and deliberately targeted minority groups to try to make it harder, not easier, for them to vote. In Congress, the Republican majorities have refused to change Section 5 and make sure that we can allow for more opportunities for people to vote, and that minority groups don't lose their voting rights and aren't continually victimized by discrimination. So it is very clear that a president not only needs to reach the White House, but to have majorities up and down the ballot to be able to move an agenda forward.
Will that task force stay in place until after 2015?
So the task force has continued to meet from last December until they're still meeting. Actually, they're finalizing their the different projects that they've been working on. A narrative project, importantly, will be moving forward, and they're going to issue their action plan, coming up very shortly. And we'll reconvene them as necessary. But they're making some robust recommendations on moving our party forward, focused not only on the next election cycle, but multiple election cycles going forward, so that we can make sure we can elect Democrats, and also not only elect candidates to office, but to make sure that we bring up that next generation of operatives and field staff and campaign managers and fundraisers, and also look to those next generations of potential community activists who we can recruit and encourage and say, you should run. You should think about it, like I did when I was in college, and one day dreamed about serving my constituents in public office. I never thought I'd have a chance to do that when I was 25 years old, and I was the youngest woman ever elected when I was elected in 1992, and it's because I had encouragement. It's because I had some infrastructure that allowed me to dream that dream, and that's our responsibility as a party.
Can I add on?
Yeah, please, absolutely.
So I just like to take that a step further and say how it affects our state. What the DNC has done, and I don't want you to think it's at the DNC and it sits there, it affects our states, and we have felt so much support. We, after the election, did an internal kind of what the DNC is doing, and we found much of the same data. But the support that the DNC is giving us in training and in preparing for redistricting is essential to help building our strong state parties. And so we thank you, and we applaud the DNC for their efforts on this.
Thank you. It's a team effort. Yeah, please.
Sir, you asked a minute ago about the differences between the Republican Congress and the Democratic president. I'll give you a stark one in my history. As I told everyone before, I lived in Washington, D.C. I was in D.C. on 9/11. I worked for Arlington County. I was in the first rookie school after that attack. I had a number of friends commit suicide. I had a number of friends get sick in New York. In the past several weeks, the Republican-controlled Congress has refused to bring up a vote, and they let it die, I'm sure you both know, the 9/11 Cancer Fund. There is an unbelievably stark difference between the two parties. For the guys who work the rubble pile to be dying of cancer, and the Republican Party will not even bring it up for a vote, that's unconscionable. So if you want to ask us the difference, please print that on the front page of whatever media you represent. That is a massive difference. Wider than the Grand Canyon.
Absolutely. Luke, and just that, oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, David mentioned the report that came out from the Republican Party that was the autopsy of the Republican Party that focused on their attempt to reach out to minority communities. We've seen that in the House as well. The gender gap generally favors the Democratic Party, but I think it's going to be even more so this time. They came out with a report in Congress, How to Talk to Women. This was the title of it. So then they proceeded to talk to women by resisting the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, excluding women who were not documented or were Native Americans, introducing numerous anti-abortion bills, shutting down government because of Planned Parenthood, refusing to bring up a bill for equal pay for equal work. This is how they talk to women. So they're not even following their own guidelines. That's a big difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress.
Can I piggyback on that issue of women? I work in a union. My sisters are paid the same as me. That's one of the greatest things about being in a union. And we see a Republican Party that wants to do away with unions, that wants to limit the ability to go to court, limit the ability to go to binding arbitration if you have a dispute with your employer. Please print that.
He's got a camera, but he'll try to finish. Yes.
Congresswoman, the issues that have been spoken about today, wouldn't more sanctioned debates give your presidential candidates greater opportunity to talk about these things more frequently? And if that's the case, why not have more sanctions?
We have a wide variety of opportunities for our candidates to be seen by voters, to showcase their own agendas, not just our 6 debates, but a number of candidate forums that are hosted by state parties, partnered with a media outlet. We've got 4 early primary states like Nevada. The voters here in a caucus state like Nevada, Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire, that's where you get the retail opportunity as a voter to really meet and get up close and personal with those voters. And there were 26 debates in our primary in 2008, and universally, I think people believe that was far too many. It takes the candidates off the trail, saps energy and resources. We need to make sure that there are many different kinds of opportunities, and there will be. Our 6 debates will be among them. I'm sorry, I'm favoring this side. Yes?
Hi, do you all see much daylight between the Democratic candidates on these issues that you mentioned, such as healthcare or unions? And if not, how do you think a candidate needs to distinguish him or herself tonight to stand up and carry the party's mantle on these issues?
All the talking. So, there is a dramatic contrast, not only on issues important to working people, like the difference between all of the Republican candidates. I mean, Jeb Bush didn't even know what the Paycheck Fairness Act was.
Oh, excuse me, I meant distinguishing.
Between one another.
Right.
Forgive me. I think actually what's the good news about our candidates when it comes to issues important to working people, access to affordable health care, and maintaining the Affordable Care Act, on making sure those aspects of reaching the middle class are achievable. There isn't a lot of difference between our candidates. All of them believe that strengthening those types of issues give more Americans an opportunity to succeed. You'll see tonight probably some differentiation among the candidates about their approach. Whether one believes that it's a higher priority to focus on education or healthcare, or making sure that immigration reform is a top priority. But unlike the Republicans, who have they have a ton of agreement on all the reversals that they want to make, but they spent their first 2 debates sniping at one another. Most of the questions, a lot of the questions from moderators were about what one candidate said about the other. That might make for interesting television, But it's not what voters want to hear when it comes to how they're going to make the best choice they can for president.
We've got time for two more.
Yes.
Disenchantment of Hispanics isn't really limited to the Republican Party at this point in time, and in this state of Nevada, turnout was really low 2 years ago or last year at the midterms. How are you working on that? How are you going to make sure that Hispanics are engaged in the 2016 elections?
We have a voter expansion department at the DNC, and each of our candidates and their campaigns are building what I think ultimately for whoever our nominee is will be the largest grassroots outreach and organizing campaign a presidential campaign has seen. We've built on the infrastructure and the organizing success of the two Obama campaigns. And obviously in a presidential election, there's a dramatically different turnout, and the issues are ultimately going to be what drives minority voters, whether it's Hispanics, Asian Americans, women, the LGBT community. It runs the gamut, and there is such a stark contrast. I mean, the Republicans have done everything they can to alienate each of those groups. I mean, Jeb Bush, first insulted Hispanics by using a really horrific slur, and then, by way of apology, said, "Oh, sorry, I meant Asian Americans," are really taking advantage of that. So it's just it's breathtaking how much they have done to insult large groups of Americans, and because of our organizational skill and how much the Republicans are alienating it, and our agenda that has already proven to many of these voters that we're on their side and we have their back, that triple whammy will ultimately result in a large turnout for the Democratic Party.
Last question.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that as we target these different groups, they're not mutually exclusive. For example, millennials are the most racially diverse group there is. So if you target them, you're also targeting racial minorities. If you're targeting the Hispanic community, tell me if I'm right, Dulcie, they say if you get the mama, you get the whole family. So that's a target of women as well as Hispanic groups. And the immigration issue is one that cuts across all groups. Asians and Pacific Islanders here in Nevada are the fastest growing group. They care very much about immigration. Now, the nuances of the types of immigration problems they have are different from the Hispanics, but they see the system as broken. So if you're talking about immigration reform, that's an issue that they very much can relate to as well.
And I think if I could just tap on that, because I think you were interested in a little bit in what's happening in Nevada. So, I can tell you that the Clinton campaign has been here for a really long time. They are organized, they're statewide, and they're reaching out to all the communities. The Bernie Sanders campaign has arrived to Nevada as well, and I expect them to set up the same kind of operation statewide, reaching out and educating our voters. The O'Malley campaign arrived last week as well, and I would expect the other two candidates to be doing that as well. Not only that, that's the campaign side. The state party, we have our own operation that we are educating. I mean, this debate is a start. We've already been doing it, but it's a big jump start for us to organizing activity, moving into our caucuses February 20th, and we'll continue to build on that.
Thank you all very much. Last question?
Yeah, just building off that theme of obstruction in Congress, you have a candidate who's pretty far to the left, gathering a lot of support this year. Do you think that represents a frustration among Democrats with center-left politics, and do you foresee the party moving to the left in, the years or decade to come?
What I see is, a majority of Americans are frustrated with the, widening wage gap, where the wealthy get wealthier, and Republican policies are hell-bent on ensuring that continues. When you have every Republican candidate embrace the Ryan Plan, which would increase taxes on the middle class, to cut taxes for the wealthy, would take us back to a time when we had virtually no regulation on big banks, and they'd repeal Dodd-Frank or dramatically cut it back so that we would put our economy at risk again. When they're willing to shut the government down, which cost our economy $24 billion the first go-around, over not just denying access to health care for everyone, but they're setting their sights, I guess, a little smaller. Well, going after women, the last time I checked, speaking as a woman who's faced a health care crisis in my life, and saying, we're going to go so far as to shut the government down to take away your health care, that I think will prove to be unwise when it comes to how women vote in this election. So thank you all so much. I want to